We can call the meeting to order. First order of business is approval of the minutes, which Tom sent out. I don't know if everybody's had a chance to look at them, but I would move approval of the minutes. What was our meeting? December 3rd, 2020.
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Minutes are approved. So I think unless there's any other business anybody wants to talk about, we'll wait for Lee, but the only thing on the agenda is to kind of get acquainted with GovHR and give them some ideas of what we're thinking in terms of the start of the process and citizen involvement, and be able to ask some questions. Tom.
Steve, I see that we have somebody named Mary C. Delaney on here. I don't know who that is, but if it's a member of the public, perhaps we should ask if they would like to appear.
Go to your emails and sign in.
This is Mary Delaney. I'm a resident of Winona, and I'm just here to observe.
Okay.
You don't want to say anything to the commission then?
I don't have anything right now. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, Steve. Go ahead.
That's all right. We usually give any members of the public any chance to tell us what they're thinking, because sometimes it doesn't have anything to do with what's on the agenda. So we'll wait a second for Lee, so we have everyone here.
I'm going to try calling him again.
Okay.
He's entering right now.
Okay.
There he is.
This is Lee McCann.
Yes, sir. We can hear you now, Lee.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Good. All right. I have just a couple of well, maybe we should start by if Joe and Lee, if you have just a brief overview of the process, especially the early stages of the process. Specifically, we're interested in, as you know, some form of citizen involvement, and we discussed that at our last meeting. And there were a couple options that Joe sent us to consider. One is a survey, which we would like to do, but we don't want to limit the first level of citizen involvement to that. We would also like something a little bit more interactive. So members of the public have a chance to, tell us in a little bit more detail about what they're thinking, rather than just answering a survey and having us see short responses.
Sure. Well, I'll start. We had another discussion after our Zoom meeting with Brian, and we talked about, in addition to surveys, which will give us some good data from folks who may not be able to give us feedback in another way. We talked about identifying some key stakeholders, and one being Nehemiah Center, which the council said they are very concerned about and interested in having involved. We're working now, Brian's been working on setting up a schedule to do another meeting like we're doing, a Zoom call or some sort of a interactive call, so we can talk with them and identify some of their concerns, their thoughts, get their suggestions and ideas with regard to the characteristics that they want to see in the next chief of police, and also what they see are as critical issues or challenges or opportunities for the next chief of police and for the police department. In addition to that, we've identified council members who are critical stakeholders, and realizing we have to be cognizant of the Open Meetings Act, we'll probably have to interview them in smaller numbers, one or two at a time, to get feedback and thoughts again and ideas about what they would like to see in the next chief of police, what they would like to consider as key characteristics, skills, abilities, knowledge, background. It helps us not just review the applicants. It also helps us as we begin conducting our Skype and Facetime interviews of the applicants, so we can drill down a little bit and we can actually try to extract some of the knowledge with regard to some of the things that are important to your stakeholders. Some of the other folks who were identified as stakeholders that we would probably, because of the numbers and because of the diversity of groups, probably have to do by targeted surveys would be Parent Equity Council for the schools, Winona Eastside Business Alliance, the Public Safety Committee. We might or might not be able to, if we can get them together, do that by a Zoom or a FaceTime interview. And what we're looking for, we would also like to do a survey of the police department to get as much input from the police department as possible from all the members. Kind of difficult to talk to each and every member of the department. If we were able to travel, if it wasn't COVID, we would actually be out there and we would be coming to roll calls and sitting in on meetings with the officers. But due to current events in our country, it's kind of impossible. So we thought we would target them with a survey written specifically for the police department. I have shared a suggested survey with Brian also. That's really geared towards one for police department and one for general community or other groups. When we're doing these surveys, as we've talked about, Steve, they have to be limited to questions that people can either select responses from or short fill-ins. Long narratives don't lend themselves to collection by the Survey Monkey because they can't be analyzed, and we'll just end up with long paragraph responses without any way to integrate and compare those. So that would be kind of the first step. We're now in the process of looking at sometime next week to discuss with Nehemiah Center. And following up on our conversation that we had also, one of the things we talked about was one of my suggestions was, in order to get the Nehemiah Center for Urban Leadership Development involved in this process, as we move forward and the group gets narrowed down from however many it is to a smaller number that you're going to want to interview, it might be a good idea if you're going to create an interview panel that consists of more than just the Police and Fire Commission, to invite someone from the Nehemiah Center to sit on that interview panel, or perhaps create 2 interview panels, and also some surrounding law enforcement professionals that can give you their perspective on the person's knowledge and responses also. And then maybe other key organization leaders that you feel are important to include in the, maybe kind of a semi-final round before you get to your final debating round and your final interviews of whatever it ends up being, 2 or 3 candidates. So that would be, that's how we gather the information. That information is also helpful because we put together an informational brochure. That brochure is intended to, and we put that on our website and provide it to you for your website. And if anybody is interested, we also email it to them if they have an inquiries on our site. That helps identify a lot of the information that people should have and need to have when they make a decision about whether or not they would like to apply for the position. So it's a lot of background information on the department, on the community as a whole, and key information, things that you know, we use it kind of as a promotional brochure, basically, you know, just to promote the position and to talk about the amenities of the locale, and to talk about what the chief or he or she may be facing when they come to the community with regard to challenges and with opportunities. That's kind of like it's step 2. Step 1 is actually putting together the position announcement. which we've already drafted to begin with, based upon.
I shared the revised draft with the commission, so we've seen it.
Right.
I have one question, a couple questions. How does the announcement fit with the brochure? And kind of what is the timetable? Is the announcement made before the brochure is ready? Are they tied together, or how does that work?
The announcement comes before the brochure. The announcement is included in the brochure.
Yeah, and the reason for that is what we will be doing is we will be targeting the advertising sites. They will not accept a lot of detailed information. They need concise, short information about the position, but then it will include a link to our site. And normally that brochure follows a week after the announcement. And then the brochure is up and available on our site for folks to look at. And as I mentioned, we also will send a link to individuals. We'll email that to them if they have inquiries, or if we identify key people that we're going to target directly, we will send them a link also, which will include the job announcement and the brochure. And then at that point, you will also have a copy of that brochure on your site for folks who navigate your site and look at the position on your site. And again, the information we gathered for the job announcement is merely to identify the key requirements. It's not to go into the great detail and depth that we go into in the brochure. The brochure is much more in depth.
And has photographs and everything too.
Right. Yeah, I've seen the examples from your RFP. So what is the timing of this? I noticed in the announcement it was there was an application deadline of January 15th. So when would the I mean, is that?
I was presuming the announcement went out on December 15th, okay, which it isn't going to.
No,
clearly not. And the brochure needs to be ready to go shortly after the announcement. And I don't think the brochure is done until you've finished talking to the stakeholders, as I understand it. So there's a little bit of
Steve, that's one of the items I was hoping that the PFC could weigh in on tonight to give the consultant and myself some direction on kind of what's your presumed timeline for when you would like the position announcement to go live. That'll help us kind of work backwards in terms of getting all of the other tasks done that need to support that.
Well, I mean, personally, I'd rather see us get come to grips with a good process first, and then figure out how long it's going to take, rather than set a deadline and kind of try to make the process fit that deadline. You know, partly you're going to have to tell us we want community involvement. The list of stakeholders that you've come up with, I think, is good, but I'm not sure it includes everyone we've talked about or everyone we may want to have on that list. And we'll get to that in a bit. So I think what I would rather see happen is we firm up the list of stakeholders. You tell us how long it takes to make the brochure after you're able to do that, to contact people or get some meaningful feedback from them. And then, you know, then I think you make the announcement with the brochure available a week or so after that, which I think is what you said. And then we kind of do the timetable from there, but I'd rather see the process arrived at before we talk about the timetable. I mean, I'm not in a huge hurry to get this done. It isn't like the position, I mean, we have an interim chief who's very capable. We're not under a huge amount of time pressure. you know, we're not Madison and Milwaukee, but you can't help but see what's happening in Madison and Milwaukee, where the selection of the police chief is very controversial, as well as the amount of community involvement is very controversial. And I don't want to rush the process and kind of shortchange all that. I'd rather get it done the way we want it. Joe?
Strong support on that, Steve.
Okay.
Well, I guess the process will depend, you know, time-wise, it'll depend on how many additional stakeholders that the commission identifies, or stakeholder groups commission identifies for us that you think are important to include in the group. I believe now, go back to my list here. We've identified, just for recap, council members, Public Safety Committee, Parent Equity Council for the Schools, Winona Eastside Business Alliance, the members of the Police Department, and a general community response was going to be the target of the survey for all residents and all businesses of the community. Any additional, of course, the Nehemiah Center also with that scheduled for a telephone call, a Zoom call, or some sort of a interactive call. So I guess what we need to hear really is who are the other stakeholder organizations you would like us to talk to, realizing that we can't reach out to everybody individually, but we can reach out to groups. And certainly if we have groups, it can expedite how many people we can speak with also, or how much feedback we can get from people.
Tom, you look like you're about to say something.
Well, I was, and it was a little bit before we started talking about stakeholders again. It was more back to the process that you were talking about, and I was confused as to whether it makes sense to try and get this initial input survey plus, you know, live interactive, some sort of input, then make the announcement and the brochure after that. And then the question in my mind is, do we make the announcement, meaning that, hey, we're going to begin a process to select a new chief, and kind of under the theory that when we start asking people by a survey or by live interview or live feedback session, if we haven't made an announcement, that just seems to me that we're backwards here. But Lee was saying that the brochure follows the announcement by 1 week, and that just doesn't seem right to me. So I'm going to shut up now and see if anybody has any.
No, I think your point's well taken, and I think initially, though, I think part of what you said is important. It's important to have the announcement out there and let people see that there is a process that is going on, followed up by the solicitation of input and feedback. It also will help people in the community get a little more motivated to respond to these surveys that are conducted and sent out to the community, so that we get a better feedback. Because of the number of potential stakeholder groups that have to be interviewed, certainly it's going to take a little bit longer now than a few days or a week to put together enough data for the brochure itself. But I think to initiate the process and to get people's interest going, I think it's important to have and basically all that announcement is it's a formal announcement. It's really meant for us to begin to advertise in locations where we know we have potential candidates that always review, including some of the minority sites. So we can reach out to the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives. We can reach out to the National Association of Women Law Enforcement Executives, reaching out to the Hispanic American Police Command Officers, reaching out to the NAACP, groups like that, with something that's short that they can then share also with membership and with potential candidates. Then, now those groups certainly wouldn't be stakeholders. In the interim, while that's happening, we will then begin gathering stakeholder information put together that brochure. That'll be a supplement now that will be out there on all the websites. And then at that point, we will start getting applications in. We need at least 30 days of advertising to be fair to everyone and to get some decent results with regard to the advertising. Subsequent to those 30 days, myself and Lee will then begin the process of due diligence with our staff. Some of our staff will be involved. Checking on the internet sites, checking on social media, doing a couple of reference checks, conducting the Skype and FaceTime interviews after we narrow down. I mean, there'll be some people that just aren't qualified. They don't have the criteria. There'll be other people that might think they're qualified, you know, on paper, but realistically they're not because their agency is the wrong size or their credentials aren't complete, things like that. So the group will get smaller, and then we will actually then select the number of people based upon what we've learned from the stakeholders are important aspects of the position, and then start to interview those people and gather our thoughts, write some critiques about them. Ultimately, that results in something that's sent to you, an electronic, we call it electronic book. It's a profile, it's an electronic profile. Normally we would have a written one and we would come there and we would sit down with you and go through it. But again, because of COVID, we can't do that. So it would be electronic, and we would then repeat that process, much like we are tonight, bringing that individual or the individuals to life, walking through their credentials, walking through the interviews, walking through what we found on the internet, walking an explanation through with you of what their organization is like and their experiences are like, whether or not they've really got the background and experience and the characteristics you're looking for, and do they even meet your basic criteria that your HR has set for the position, things like that. Giving you the results of the interview, talking about some of the responses to the questions, let you know what 2 of their references have said about them, and then helping you identify who would be the next, who would stay in the process for the next round of interviews that you're going to conduct or your panels will conduct. And then hopefully by the final interview process, you'd be down to 3 people or so that you would have in a very focused interview group. If you did actually want to do a narrowly focused interview group, if you, at that point you hadn't already seen your ideal candidate in the group. So I'm walking through it fast, but you know, realistically, I think the whole schedule is certainly, it's flexible according to your needs. There's no need to rush it. I think the only positive thing that I would say about, you know, getting it out there early, the information out there early, is it helps us pique the interest in folks that are good candidates with regard to the position announcement itself.
If I'm following Tom correctly, I think what we're trying to square there is piquing candidates versus piquing the community. And if getting the announcement out doesn't necessarily do much for the community, which I don't know that it would.
Yeah, and it isn't intended to really, it's intended to begin identifying and getting candidates, you know, generating their resumes, their cover letters, that are thinking about whether or not there's an opportunity here for them to apply for a position, you know, and again, there's a whole list of ad sites that we've sent to Brian. You could take a look at that. They're key law enforcement sites that identify that then a lot of potential people will look at and will identify opportunities for. And we know because we've used a lot of these sites in the past. The next round is the interviewing of stakeholders comes from, number one, your database of people reaching out and sending out a notice that on your website and through your sources that we have this ability for everybody in the community to weigh in, take this survey. And it's a simple process for them. They log on, they fill it out, and SurveyMonkey calculates some things for us. In the interim, we're also going to be doing some of the more focused discussions with folks in groups to get that, again, drill down into we will have some key questions we're going to ask them, you know, to get the real gist of what they're looking for, what they consider our problems in the community, what they consider our major issues in the community. Are they satisfied with services from the police department? Are they not satisfied? Would they even accept a chief from outside the community, or do they think the best opportunity for the community is someone from outside? That's assuming you have anybody internally that even wants to apply also. asking them questions about the communication. Does your police department communicate with you? So we can identify some of the needs too as we move forward. A communicator, somebody who understands best practices, somebody who's had a depth of experience working on serious community problems, somebody also who can be seen as a true leader by the department. Because don't forget, that one of the key things is you might have the best person in the world. If he or she can't motivate the officers, then we don't have a very successful chief either. I'm kind of capsulizing our process. It's normally a 90-day process, but that doesn't mean it has to be a 90-day process. We can really tailor it to whatever your needs are. And it sounds like, in many cases, communities want to move along quickly because they have a big void.
Yes, and that's not the case here.
Yep, exactly. And I think the question that came up for me, and I obviously haven't been involved in these, so I don't know if it's the right one or not. But the question that came up for me is, if we get the announcement out too quickly on the candidate track, are we putting a clock on ourselves for the community track that we don't necessarily want to have, especially before that community process is a little bit more well-defined?
Probably not, because the schedule is yours also. When I said we usually take 30 days, we post for 30 days, you could say 45 days, or what you could say is until filled. We'll leave it open until filled. So that gives you open end. So there is no deadline date. What that also does is, if there's a person who's thinking about it and we get to day 30 and they haven't decided, they're not under pressure to decide either. They might be a really great candidate, and we would see that because there would still be applications coming in. Although normally what happens is, in about the first 21 days, external candidates apply. About the 29th day, the internal candidates apply. They always wait till the last day or second to last day because I guess they're keeping things close to the vest. Invariably, once in a while, we'll get somebody that applies a week late, and we'll take a look at it. But most of the time, they're not the stellar candidates. The really talented people, they stay on top of these things. But it's really up to you. And if you would like to make it a 45-day process so that there's more time for some of the other activities, that's fine too. We just sent the schedule was a proposed schedule because it's an example of what we could do. But we can certainly change that schedule. It's flexible.
As is the announcement.
No, the entire schedule.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, as is the announcement. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I thought you were asking a question.
Nope, I was just giving my 2 cents worth.
Yes, sir.
Well, let's talk about the stakeholders just a little bit and see if we have really other ones. I have, I think I assume the city council includes the mayor. The Parents Equity Council was on my list, as was Nehemiah. I'm not acquainted enough with the business organization to really have a feel for whether that's the right contact for the business community or not. And I don't know if Ann or Tom have a feel for that, or whether there are additional business community leaders that we'd want to include in that. Ann, what do you think?
Did we talk? I think I heard you say that we would survey the business community. Were you speaking to a electronic survey and not a live process for that? Because if that were the case,
yes, for the Winona. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm just picturing that we would use the Winona East Side Business Alliance database to send out a survey, which I think would be a great way of reaching the businesses and giving them the opportunity to speak out with anything that would give the whole business community an opportunity.
Yeah, I would coordinate with the executive director of MESBA to assist in getting the SurveyMonkey link out to all of the businesses that are members of MESBA.
And then just to remember that includes Madison businesses, and I don't know how far reaching we really want to be. I would assume that we would probably want to stick to the Winona businesses.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah.
But I think that's a good list to start with to reach the Winona community, business community.
Okay. That sounds good. And if we can get, obviously access to the list and get that shared, it sounds like it should hit pretty much who we want. All right. The other thing we talked about as a representative of the school district, to have some input. And I'm not 100% sure who that would be. Brian would probably have a pretty good idea of who the interface with the school district and the city normally would be, but I think the school district should have some ideas here.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we'd send to the superintendent. That's kind of like a staff to staff type of interaction. But also we would ask the superintendent to send it to the school board. I know that, obviously their membership is a little bit different because there are representatives from Cottage Grove and representatives from Winona. There is a school resource officer that is in the school. It's covering the whole district as district wide. So I think getting the feedback from the Cottage Grove school board representatives doesn't hurt us. It's another data point. So I think we would send it to the school board as a whole as well.
Okay, good. Then another suggestion was the Black Student Union at Winona Grove High School, I think it is, which is a student group. I personally, I think there's some merit to including them in addition to the Parents Equity Council. I also think back to when I was in high school, and kids obviously are different now. I don't think that I or my classmates would have had a whole lot of value to add to a process like this 50 years ago or whenever it was. But I think that would be an important group to reach out to and see what they have to say. And maybe that's an appropriate question to run by the Nehemiah folks as well, whether they see value in it. I think the answer will be they do. But on the other hand, if they think it's a horrible idea, then I'm willing to listen to them as well. But
what's the name of the group again?
It's called the Black Student Union, and if you Google them, the school district's website has email addresses of the faculty advisors, but that's about it. There's no other contact information. I'm sure we can get contact information.
What is the school again? What's the name of the school?
I think it's the Winona Grove School District. It's a district-wide group, I believe. Anyone else have ideas for stakeholders that we're missing from the list?
I think that hits the core institutions.
I don't know if Steve, if you discussed with the commission members also, Lee and I have a contact with the Dane County NAACP, and that's going to be a resource we're going to use for getting the word out to qualified minority candidates. It was pretty successful in some other recruitments we've done in the Dane County area. And also because of the location where the individual is also a member of a commission, he had a lot of good insight in that particular city too. So it actually was great because he gave us some good insight into the city, but he also was a resource to get the word out to candidates that this is something that's open and legitimate and you should apply. So I think it lends more credibility to the process sometimes coming from somebody like that too.
Yeah,
if you're comfortable with that.
I didn't mention that, but yes, I'm certainly comfortable with that. I think it's a great idea. I think we need to kind of make an effort to hear from people that we don't ordinarily hear from and be more inclusive in this process. So absolutely, I would involve them.
Okay.
And then kind of to get back to the process again, I would have no problem with keeping the application using a 45-day deadline rather than 30. I guess I'm not sure that an open until filled deadline would make sense yet. You know, I think that's more of a second round if we don't find a candidate the first time. And it just would screw up the timing too much. You'd get an application, you know, too late in the process to really make it fair to everyone. So I think 45 days is probably a good idea. Ann?
Can we clarify, would we be acting on these applications throughout those 45 days, or are we waiting until 45 days is closed before moving forward?
No, what we would be doing is that 45 days for a process to begin to allow us to look at, review, eliminate some of the candidates, kind of rate some of these candidates. We have a computer system they download their information into, and we review it and we give them star ratings, but they'll also fill out some questionnaires. And at the end of that 45 days, we will have a pool of what we consider qualified candidates and lesser qualified candidates. There may be 5 stars and 4 stars. And then we will begin identifying some simple things that are important, like, do they have something out there in the internet that's embarrassing or problematic, or some reason why they shouldn't be considered? We will then start our part of the interviews, our Skype and Facetime interviews, looking at them on screen, getting the responses to our questions, reading their body language, and kind of probing them. And then at the end of that, the next 30, that'll be a 30-day process. I'm simplifying it, but it takes a lot more time, gathering information on their background. Then we will prepare a list of those folks with their credentials and their backgrounds for you to consider. And that's when you decide, do you want to, how many rounds of interviewing do you want to do then? And it depends on the group. I mean, the group might be 12 people, it might be 20 people, it might be 10 people. It really depends on how many are really good fits also, because fit is important. And then when you decide on the smaller group, from that group, again, it might be 5 that you want to interview or 10 you want to interview for panels. If you decide on panels, we'll work with you to make sure that we provide you with, and you also have key questions, standardized scoring process so everybody is evaluated the same way. You can put together multiple panels or a single panel. And then the final group, whether it's 3 or 2 or 4, will have a lot more back office work done by our staff. We'll actually conduct a true background investigation. We have a service that does a background check. So they'll verify educational credentials. We'll check their driver history. We will check their criminal history on multiple databases going back at least 7 years. We will do a credit history check to make sure that since they're going to be handling your resources, they don't have a problematic credit history. And then those 3 folks or whatever that final group is, you'll have that information for also to make your final decision.
And as a final public involvement, is that where municipalities typically have some form of meet and greet or virtual session with the finalists where that the public can attend? And
yes and no. Yes and no.
It really depends on the community. What we've had happen in the past is, when everybody could travel freely, we would actually have a meet the candidates night. There would be 3 candidates that would come and talk about themselves. That's a slippery slope, because in one community we had the mayor pass out cards and ask the community to give their opinion of the individual. So they thought they were voting. And when it was all over and he collected the cards, and it really wasn't a different candidate was offered a position, let me say. And so now there was a problem between the police commission that had the authority to make the job offer and the mayor who assumed the authority to make the offer. So it's a slippery slope, and people had voted for somebody that the mayor appointed, but had to unappoint. It was a really nasty thing. So you gotta be careful that people aren't coming there to vote on the candidate. They're coming there to meet the candidates or the candidate. If by that time you've decided on your one person, you're presenting the person that the Police and Fire Commission have decided to recommend for conditional employment, and it'll be, if be ratified by the council. But when it depends on how it's presented. If you aren't certain, then community input is valuable, but it's kind of hard under these terms, or in terms of now I know in Wisconsin a little bit different than Illinois. There's a little bit more freedom right now to participate in groups, but people are reluctant to still do that. But you might want that valuable input also. But there's another way to do that. We could have the candidate presentations. They give a short presentation based on some questions you have, and that could be pre-recorded. Or you could do what we're doing now and have a Zoom meeting with your community and with your candidates. And that would allow for a lot of people to see the candidates all at the same time too. So really, it's kind of open-ended depending on what your desires are.
It's a real danger, though. The real danger to this is the impression that we're voting, that the people of the community are voting, whereas you've already done all your due diligence and you're pretty close to your candidate anyway. And then you get a public reaction that's negative. So I caution you against it, but it's up to you to do it or not to.
Well, is that something we have to decide now, or is it prudent to think about the earlier community? Now. Yeah, exactly. So if it's prudent to think about the earlier community steps in the process and then make a judgment halfway through whether that's part of the second half of the process.
That's right.
Sure, certainly. And another thing you can do too is not decide on panel interviews at this point, but you could decide you might want an alternative process. You might want to have an assessment center and an interview process, both. And we'd have to know that probably halfway through so we could begin preparing for that. But we have plenty of time for that.
Joe, just for those who don't know, why don't you just explain real briefly what an assessment center is and how that's different from other assessment measures?
Yeah. An assessment center for a police chief would be a series of different types of exercises, which are kind of gauged based upon routine, normal day-to-day activities or key skills that the individual needs to have. And it would be scored by 3 to 4 assessors that are given some special training. So it could be an interview. They're conducting an interview based upon a scenario that are provided them. Could be an in-basket. It could be a typical day in the life of a chief of police, which it's not. It's really compressed, but it's based. It try to determine their decision-making skills and their knowledge of what a chief does on a day-to-day basis. It could be a interactive process where the individual is given a problem, they have to solve a problem. Could be a group, could be all 3 or 4 of your finalists that you want to have in a leaderless group discussion. You provide them with the problem and they discuss it, and you see who your leaders are and who has the most logical solution. A lot of different ways it can be done. We could show you what that types of exercises are, but it's really meant to show their decision-making skills, their persuasiveness, their reasoning skills, their organizational skills, their time budgeting skills, ability to counsel, if that's one of the scenarios, counsel problem employees, and knowledge of what they can and can't do with regard to that type of counseling. And that gives you another way of measuring the individual besides just a direct interview. But that's an option too. That's not an included activity. That would be something we'd have to discuss as an option.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we'll defer all of that for now, and so we'll work on the first steps first. And then the commission can discuss a little later on, further community involvement, which I do understand the potential pitfall of that. I think we can communicate it in a clear way as to what we're seeking from the public rather than a vote, although that doesn't necessarily mean that's the way it'll be understood, no matter how clear you make it, unfortunately.
Oh, sure.
All right, that gives us something to think about.
I can tell you, just to add to that and to what Lee said, I was given an outline of a conditional offer to give to the candidate, at the request of a city official, which I presented. It was somebody that was in the administrative chain, and the individual was presented with that, and then that's when it was withdrawn. And that's why it caused so many problems. The individual had basically a letter in his hand stating that we want you to be our next chief of police. And unfortunately, the head of the Police and Fire Commission and the mayor didn't communicate together. So the letter went to the person and it had to be then retracted. So it did cause some bad feelings. It didn't result in litigation. It got stopped before that. But it also kind of created an expectation by the community. And so then a lot of people in the community were very disappointed that their vote didn't count. And so they were never told they weren't voting. And they actually got cards and they filled out the cards. And that was, I think, the biggest problem.
Yeah. I can imagine.
It was well intended.
Steve, I think Mary understands that the PFC in Wisconsin makes the hiring decisions, not the mayor, not the council.
Yes.
And Brian, you're shaking your head, yes and no. Just to make perfectly clear, wouldn't hurt to just remind her of that, maybe either Steve or Brian, but I think she understands.
She does, and we've talked about it. She's very clear on what the rules are. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and she confirmed that with us also.
All right.
When we discussed hiring authority right from the start because we don't want to have these problems. Good. And she very emphatically said yes, the police and fire commission. And we understand Wisconsin law, but sometimes the communication gets convoluted. And so when like a city administrator says, well, I was instructed let's go ahead and do it. You assume that it was the police commission that said, go ahead and do it. And it wasn't. We respect, that process and that authority.
Yeah, and I think Brian Gatto is smart enough to figure that out as well. So hopefully we won't have those issues.
We won't. We won't. All right. As far as the survey goes, are you going to share that with us before it becomes available?
I sent a draft of each of the surveys now. One that's meant for the police department employees, and one that's meant for the community stakeholders. And Brian will have that. So if you take a look at that, the only thing that I want to advise you is we can't just put out an open-ended question where someone writes a paragraph or narrative. So when you see how it's structured, it's a couple of short fill-in answers or some multiple choice answers so that we can tabulate it, graph it, and get some data and statistics that are going to be useful. And you'll also know too.
Is a helpful way to think of it that, this is to get some of the baseline quantified graphable information.
Yes.
And that we're finding some sort of community environment to provide these results or solicit that more open-ended, then those two can complement each other, whether it's holding a PFC meeting sometime in January or some other forum sort of set up that facilitates that better.
Yes, well said. I mean, that you've basically summarized it. Yeah, that's important. We had a community out east that wanted the community to be able to put in all of their comments. So what happened was, this was a community of 360,000 people. Fortunately, only about 8,000 responded, but there were 8,000 7-question narratives, and it was impossible to get any useful data out of it because everybody wrote what they were thinking, and so there was no correlation. And it basically, we had one of our staff try to make some sense out of it, and she spent weeks trying to make sense out of it, and it was hard. It was hard. and it didn't work.
So I don't know if Brian or Steve had mentioned this already. I volunteered to spend some time with the surveys because I do that professionally.
Okay.
Thank you.
So one of my questions before I jump into that is, how standardized are these surveys? Is this something where you have a pretty standard survey that's been road tested through all your jobs over time, or do you tend to vary it by types of community, or how is it developed?
Well, we'll vary the questions based upon, sometimes, based upon the community, and sometimes we'll replicate the same one. First of all, what we'll look at is, from our interviews with, the earlier interviews with Steve and with Brian, what is it that they envision, the future of the police department is going to look like, and that helps us kind of drill down into the survey. And then some of it is really kind of boilerplate stuff. Is there true communication coming from in your opinion, as a community member? What type of personality would you like to see? Conversely, in the police department is, has your chief been a leader? What type of leader would you like to see for the future? Do you feel that there's anybody in your organization that would be a good chief? How would your department react to somebody from outside versus inside? All sorts of questions like that. Some standard and some unique to the individual locale if we need to do it. There too, it's it's sometimes again, if we were actually coming to Winona and we would sit in a roll call or a couple of roll calls and talk to the officers, we'd have a lot more ability to ask a lot more questions and get a lot more notes and be more general. In this case, we've got to be kind of specific so that we can make sure that we focus the responses. If that helps, if that answers your question.
Yeah, and I think some of it too is, again, part of my professional experience is just nitpicking survey language endlessly. So I don't know that that's a useful exercise here if, even if you're customizing the questions to what Steve and Brian have told you, if these are questions you've asked a lot of times before and already refined the phrasing over time to make sure you're getting what you want out of it, that's good context to know. If it is a little bit more customized and open-ended, then that's a different way.
Well, also it fits within the parameters of SurveyMonkey too, because they have parameters, and we just blew up their computers when we tried this other method for a community out east with 8,000 responses. Those 8,000 became 8,000 times 8. It was crazy. We actually kept the officers' surveys more within the parameters of what they really expected of us to do. And again, because it's a service that doesn't charge, they charge minimal amount really. They set very strict parameters. You've got other survey organizations, they'll charge you a lot of money and you could ask anything you want and people can respond any way they want. But again, I don't know that you want to extend your budget for that type of a survey. They're expensive. So pretty much, we don't want to give the commission the impression that anything is predetermined. This is your process. We have a standard format we normally follow, and it's flexible and we can tailor it. There's certain things we know that we have to do, but there's other things that we're at your disposal to make sure happen.
We appreciate that. We're not, we haven't really, I'm the only one who was on the commission 16 years ago when we hired the prior chief. So we haven't really done this before. And we have some general ideas about what we want, but in terms of executing those, we need you and we need to rely on your advice, and we absolutely do appreciate that. So I don't have anything further. Anybody else on the commission have anything further, any further questions or comments?
I have a question.
Yeah.
When do you want to release the professional announcement? You want me to wait until the new year and then add 45 days onto that for the resume?
Are the holidays good or bad for a release of something like this, or does it matter?
I think it matters. and I don't think it's good.
All right.
Let's wait.
Let's wait.
Yeah.
So we'll release it the first week of January. And but you'll get a copy of it before then.
Okay.
How about
right,
for
we'll
deploying a survey? Is that good or bad over the holidays? Because I can see the idea that everybody being cooped up inside for the next 2 weeks on vacation might not be a bad thing for response rates, but I don't know if you've had experience with that before.
You know, I think that's a great idea because, you know, people are going to be home, you know, even, you know, folks that are working from home are going to be home, but folks that are working will now be having quite a bit of downtime because of their vacations for the holidays. And it might not be bad. I think, you know, if you see the surveys, if you look at those questions and you're comfortable with those, I'll try to work with our staff. We have a staff member that actually gets those prepared for SurveyMonkey in the format they want. Right now, they're not in the format they want. They're just the questions, if you look at the raw material. And then I'll make sure I talk to her, make sure she's going to be available, and then we can get that out there and test the waters and see if we can get some good responses back. Yeah. And we can set.
If you want to send that along, and I can try to take a look at it as quickly as possible, along with anybody else, certainly on the.
Yeah, I sent it to the whole commission about 3 minutes ago.
Okay.
Okay.
Got it. There it is.
All right. Excellent.
I don't think we need to necessarily cut the survey off at the time that the announcement goes out. I mean, if the survey goes out, you know, around the holiday time, maybe we get a lot of response in, maybe we don't, but we can let that go on.
Sure, we can set a deadline, you know, further past that, and yeah. I mean, we just have to have some date definite so we can then stop it and compile all the data. But you know, that could be off in you know, future sometime.
I would assume just with enough time to compile the data for our meeting or for whatever forum type thing we're doing for the more open-ended feedback.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, I think. I think now the only difference we have is, and before we depart, with regard to the Nehemiah Center folks, now we weren't going to survey them. We were actually going to interview them. And we're going to be asking pertinent questions with regard to, you know, their view about community police relations, about needs for the community, about the responses the community that, at least from their perspective, are receiving from your department, the leadership of the department, you know, so a lot different questions. You know, talking about, you know, their involvement with regard to your whole incident that, you know, manifested it last year into a call to have the community get more involved in what's going on in the police department. So from that respect, you know, I mean, certainly we're going to tell them about the survey in case they want their members to know about it and participate. Hopefully they'll encourage them to, but the key leadership, I think they're going to give us different information, which then we will also share with you.
Good. I understood that as part of the process, and that's the same process with the city council, right? I mean, they're going to have an opportunity to tailor their input a little more, which is very good.
And is it helpful to say in the survey, I mean, we don't need to be any more specific than necessary maybe, but is it helpful to say in the survey that there will be opportunities for more general open-ended feedback at a later point in the process? You know, stay tuned.
Yeah, I don't think we need it in the survey. You know, that might be something they put on the website when you know, people are going to the website and then they go to the link. But in the survey itself, we probably don't need to put that. The survey, that just doesn't make sense. The heading of the survey itself just explains what we're doing and who we are, what we're doing, why we're doing it.
Yeah, the marketing piece that goes along with the survey link, I think, is where we put that. Yep.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate your time and look forward to working with you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
tell the other commissioners that one of the reasons we feel the process works so well is we give a guarantee. Did you tell them about that? I don't know if they're aware of it. We guarantee that if the individual that you hire, you find unsatisfactory and ask him or her to leave, or they leave you within the first year, then we will redo the process all over again, just for the expenses involved, no fees. And Lee and I have not had to do that in any of our recruitments. We do a lot of the police recruitments and communication center recruitments, and we haven't done that. So we think the process works. And we're certainly well known in the Madison area, and we've done quite a few in the Madison area. And so far, none of those chiefs have been fired yet. So I think that's a good thing.
Knock on wood, huh?
We'll try to keep that streak going for you.
All right.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Have a good night. Thanks very much.
So if there's nothing further, we could have a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
I will second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All right. Thanks, everyone. Joe, we're deferring to you on the survey, so.